tonight we go back to chapter 25, The Knot of Matter. We're roughly halfway through this chapter, which appeared in the Arya to open its third year of publication in August of 1916. By the way, it was in this issue, the August issue of 1916, that Sri Aurobindo began that long and luminous series of essays on the Gita. The first chapter there being our demand and need from the Gita. We're studying the Life Divine, but I encourage you to go back and pick that volume up and read it as well. So, as I said, we're nearly halfway through this chapter, and Sri Aurobindo has been explaining how spirit and matter are really a single reality. There is no division. But how we arrive at this experience of separativity is based upon our experience of matter, and how matter, in a sense, involves itself from the heights of the spirit into the base of what seems to be inconscient through a separative action of mind, acting with, shall we say, the permission of this all-organizing, all-harmonizing supramental consciousness to go out and establish form and give maximum possibility to each separative individual formation. But with that permission to separate comes a fragmentation, comes the sense of division. Now, if matter is ultimately arranged, formed by mind, and based upon this principle of self-absorption, then there are three laws, or three powers of matter, which are useful to it in that way. The first is the power of ignorance, to ignore what you are in the round, in the large sense, and become what is small. To leave unity and become division. A second, leaning on that ignorance, is to rely upon a mechanical law to operate the functionalities of that organized system of division, which results in a kind of inertia, not simply physical inertia, but inertia in a metaphysical sense as well. So he's described those two stages, and that's where we dropped our study together last time. Now we're going to pick up the third with this next paragraph. And he writes, "And when we seek to know why this is so, we see that the success of this inertia and obstruction is due to a third power of matter. For the third fundamental opposition which matter offers to spirit is this, that it is the culmination of the principle of division and struggle. Indivisible indeed in reality, divisibility is its whole basis of action, from which it seems forbidden ever to depart. For its only two methods of union are either the aggregation of units or an assimilation which involves the destruction of one unit by another. And both of these methods of union are a confession of eternal division, since even the first associates rather than unifies, and by its very principle admits the constant possibility and therefore the ultimate necessity of dissociation, of dissolution." Well, these are important terms: aggravation, aggregation, from the Latin, aggregare, to bring together, to collect into a whole. Often it means under a common principle. And assimilation, assimilare in Latin, to make alike, to incorporate, and more crudely, to swallow, to engulf and devour. So both methods, aggregation and assimilation, he says, repose on death. One as a means, the other as a condition of life. And both presuppose as the condition of world existence a constant struggle of the divided units with each other, each striving to maintain itself, to maintain its associations, to compel or destroy what resists it, to gather in and devour others as its food, but itself moved to revolt against and flee from compulsion, destruction, and assimilation by devouring. So you get this picture. We're thrown into this struggle, and to live, you have to swallow the other fellow and avoid being swallowed. This in Hindu philosophy is called the logic of the fish, Matsya Nyaya. The small unit resists the larger. The larger wants to incorporate it. And this is, of course, at the physical level. When the vital principle, he writes, manifests its activities in matter, it finds there this basis only for all its activities and is compelled to bow itself to the yoke. So it begins with this colossal array of divided units, all in a sense detached from each other, each seeking mastery, each seeking survival. And so it is a brutal scene, and life appears in that. He says it has to accept the law of death, desire, and limitation, and that constant struggle to devour, possess, dominate, which we have seen to be the first aspect of life. Remember chapter 20, a few chapters ago, was titled Death, Desire, and Incapacity. And he dealt with all of this there. These material methods are the conditions in which life and later mind have to emerge and struggle, striving to attain completeness, to gain satisfaction, to understand and know. To continue, and when the mental principle manifests in matter, it has to accept from the mold and material in which it works the same principle of limitation, of seeking without secure finding, the same constant association and dissociation of its gains and of the constituents of its works, so that the knowledge gained by man, the mental being, seems never to be final or free from doubt and denial, and all his labor seems condemned to move in a rhythm of action and reaction, and of making and unmaking, in cycles of creation, in brief preservation, and long destruction, with no certain and assured progress. So based on this principle of division, you can see that the same struggle asserts itself at every level of existence as founded upon matter. How to remain in your own integrity as an individual unit within that separation where everything's trying to surround you. How not to be devoured when you are manifesting life. How to really know in a secure way when you begin to perceive, reflect, and attempt to understand. This principle of division, which is basic to matter, is shot through all of the manifestation that relies upon it. Matter gives it form, and therefore, if it's going to play, it has to play under the terms and conditions of matter, and these are its terms: ignorance, inertia, division. So, he continues with the next paragraph. Especially and most fatally, the ignorance, inertia, and division of matter impose on the vital and mental existence emerging in it the law of pain and suffering and the unrest of dissatisfaction with its status of division, inertia, and ignorance. Ignorance would indeed bring no pain of dissatisfaction if the mental consciousness were entirely ignorant, if it could halt satisfied in some shell of custom, unaware of its own ignorance or of the infinite ocean of consciousness and knowledge by which it lives surrounded. But precisely, it is to this that the emerging consciousness in matter awakes. First, to its ignorance of the world in which it lives and which it has to know and master in order to be happy. Secondly, to the ultimate barrenness and limitation of this knowledge, to the meagerness and insecurity of the power and happiness it brings, and to the awareness of an infinite consciousness, knowledge, true being in which alone is to be found a victorious and infinite happiness. So our limitation becomes felt to us. We then have this rendered dissatisfaction, and our mobility in the universe, and our gathering of experience and our reflection upon it, there is no satisfaction because we are not allowed to reach completion because of the division inherent in matter. It might be noted that this character of the worldly experience is even reflected in the figure of the enlightened sage. The inward freedom is there. Does the body share it? One might impose that limitless consciousness upon the life parts, upon the vitality. But does the physical receive that same illumination? Each sage who has written candidly about this has recorded that this is part of the reason why, when confronted with life's obstructions, they retire into the sublimities of their awareness, where there is only light and peace and harmony and love and entirety of being. We'll come back to that. This enigma, which is matter, must be solved. You'll note that Sri Aurobindo has spent now 2 chapters analyzing and looking into the nature of matter, and he is not going to leave it. Barren though it seems to us. So, he has in this paragraph ignorance, inertia, and division. These are the 3 powers or culminations, the culminating points at which matter has arrived in its formation. And our experience valorizes, gives value to the world, and we reflect upon it and find it wanting. Consciousness, he says, awakes to the nature of its ignorance. And then it awakes to the limits of its happiness and says, this can't be all. So he continues, nor would the obstruction of inertia bring with it unrest and dissatisfaction if the vital sentience emerging in matter were entirely inert, if it were kept satisfied with its own half-conscient, limited existence, unaware of the infinite power and immortal existence in which it lives as part of and yet separated from it, or if it had nothing within driving it towards the effort really to participate in that infinity and immortality. So if our ignorance was complete, if our inertia was complete, we'd be smug. We'd be snug as a bug in a rug in this darkness. But there is something in us, and he says, but this is precisely what all life is driven to feel and seek from the first. Its insecurity and the need and struggle for persistence, for self-preservation. It awakes in the end to the limitation of its existence and begins to feel the impulsion towards largeness and persistence, towards the infinite and the eternal. So we feel the impulsion within to the vast, to the timeless. We are pushed from something embedded within us to exceed and go beyond our natural limits as matter would define them. He continues, and when in man life becomes wholly self-conscious, this unavoidable struggle and effort and aspiration reach their acme, and the pain and discord of the world become finally too keenly sensible to be borne with contentment. We cannot accept life as it is. We struggle, we complain, we push back, we try to overcome it. It's inherent in us to do that. Man may for a long time quiet himself by seeking to be satisfied with his limitations, or by confining his struggle to such mastery as he can gain over this material world he inhabits, some mental and physical triumph of his progressive knowledge over its inconscient fixities, of his small, concentrated conscious will and power over its inertly driven monstrous forces. So this struggle for consciousness reaches its acme with the human, and it will not accept that limitation. But here too, he finds the limitation, the poor inconclusiveness of the greatest results he can achieve, and is obliged to look beyond. The finite cannot remain permanently satisfied so long as it is conscious either of a finite greater than itself or of an infinite beyond itself to which it can yet aspire. So, as long as we can see the bigger picture, something in us wants to unite with that. If it's the cosmos, we want to be cosmic in extent. If we see what is beyond all cosmos, all figuration, we want to become one with that oneness. And if the finite could be so satisfied, Sri Aurobindo writes, yet the apparently finite being who feels himself to be really an infinite, or feels merely the presence or the impulse and stirring of an infinite within, can never be satisfied till these two are reconciled, till that is possessed by him and he is possessed by it in whatever degree or manner. So the urge of the finite to join the infinite. As Sri Aurobindo wrote by this time, years ago, in the Synthesis of Yoga, he who chooses the infinite has been chosen by the infinite. Something in us is implanted that pushes, that aspires, that inspires, and we must be relentlessly forward. Other creatures may rest somewhat content in their temporary station because they too are evolving, but the human is perpetually restless, cannot be satisfied. Every home is a way station to it. We must always be going. Every plateau reveals to us another mountain range, and we must ever be climbing. Sri Aurobindo says, man is such a finite seeming infinity, and cannot fail to arrive at a seeking after the infinite. He is the first son of earth who becomes vaguely aware of God within him, of his immortality or of his need of immortality, and the knowledge is a whip that drives and a cross of crucifixion until he is able to turn it into a source of infinite light and joy and power. This is a Vedic image and an embracing image that pulls in its phrasing, all religions, all experiences. We're pushed forward until we find the way that transversal meets with the vertical. And we, at that center point, unite the cosmos with the reality from above. Join eternity and time. We cannot be satisfied because infinite light, joy, and power is possible to us. It is, after all, our originating home. We are from that. This progressive development, he writes, this growing manifestation of the divine consciousness and force, knowledge and will that had lost itself in the ignorance and inertia of matter, might well be a happy efflorescence proceeding from joy to greater and at last to infinite joy, if it were not for the principle of rigid division from which matter has started. So we can't go on a happy gallop back to that which originated us. This principle of division is there. It seems to be real. And to make those eternities part of our timely experience, we've got to dissolve that principle of division here in the very basis of matter. He says the shutting up of the individual in his own personal consciousness of separate and limited mind, life, and body prevents what would otherwise be the natural law of our development. So remember, as mind separates forms to establish the laws of the universe and it eventuates in matter, that principle of separation is in a sense the beginning point of the individual. The individual arises from that, creates the first sense of self, which is ego. I am, but I am against everything else. And that ego has behind it, of course, a soul seeking real unity. And the ego is a temporary facade through which the developing individual power authentically looks out at the world. But at the beginning we accept this separation. We accept a limited mind, a limited life, a limited body. And that's the basis from which we work. And this idea of the individual, of course, he'll take up as we reach the close of this chapter in just a couple of pages. The shutting up of the individual, we were saying, prevents what would otherwise be the natural law of our development. It brings into the body the law of attraction and repulsion, of defense and attack, of discord and pain. For each body, being a limited conscious force, feels itself exposed to the attack, impact, forceful contact of other such limited conscious forces or of universal forces, and where it feels itself broken in upon or unable to harmonize the contacting and the recipient consciousness, it suffers discomfort and pain, is attracted or repelled, has to defend itself or to assail. It is constantly called upon to undergo what it is unwilling or unable to suffer. So this principle of division, resulting from our self-enclosure of the individual, because remember, we're involved in this self-ignoring. We have permitted this, we have given our assent to it, we have joined this process. We signed the contract and here we are. The body has to go through this attack, forceful contact, and consequent reaction. Note that his philosophic perfection is looking at it from a lofty principle, impersonally detached from the mere personal subjective experience. He's describing this as if witnessing it from outside, able to spell out for us what the vast vision of this looks like. Because that was his experience. He had exalted his awareness to that. So this is the body. Next, into the emotional and the sense mind, the law of division brings the same reactions with the higher values of grief and joy, love and hatred, oppression and depression, all cast into terms of desire, and by desire into straining and effort, and by the straining into excess and defective force, incapacity, the rhythm of attainment and disappointment, possession and recoil, a constant strife and trouble and unease. So this is the response of our emotional and sense mind to the shocks of life, always in terms, as he says, of desire or possession. We're looking for something, or we're pursued by something. We're trying to possess and aggrandize, or something is trying to engulf us and imprison us. And that's our experience at that level. So far as described then, what the body's experience is by principle of division, and what the sense mind and emotions experiences by principle of division. Now, into the mind as a whole, instead of a divine law of narrower truth flowing into greater truth, lesser light taken up into wider light, lower will surrendered to higher transforming will, pettier satisfaction progressing towards nobler and more complete satisfaction, it brings similar dualities of truth pursued by error, light by darkness, power by incapacity, pleasure of pursuit and attainment by pain of repulse and a dissatisfaction with what is attained. Mind takes up its own affliction along with the affliction of life and body and becomes aware of the triple defect and insufficiency of our natural being. So mind looks at all of this experience. How the body, the life, and the mind are continually taunted and perplexed by the universe around, and says, this isn't what I was looking for. All this, he writes, means the denial of ananda, bliss, delight, the negation of the trinity of Sat-Chit Ananda. And of course that means Sat is existence, Chit is consciousness, and Ananda is delight. All this means the denial of Ananda, the negation of the trinity of Sat-Chit Ananda. And therefore, if the negation be insuperable, the futility of existence. So, if this separation stands, then the experience of the world we inhabit will be futile. We cannot regain the experience of Sat-Chit Ananda here, if this is true. He continues, for existence, in throwing itself out in the play of consciousness and force, must seek that movement, not merely for itself, but for satisfaction in the play. And if in the play no real satisfaction can be found, it must obviously be abandoned in the end as a vain attempt, a colossal mistake, a delirium of the self-embodying spirit. Because Sat-Chit Ananda is an infinite existence. It is unified, omnipotent consciousness and power. It is an undimmed experience constantly of bliss. This existence, exploring itself consciously, only arrives at delight again and again and again, and in unrolling itself, even if it throws itself out into apparent loss in terms of division, must be able to regain it. But here Sri Aurobindo writes, what we experience seems to be the denial of that very principle of Ananda, which must be the very fount of why there is any manifestation at all. It has to be this omnipotent, omniscient being throwing itself out in exaltation. The universe must be ultimately redeemed into terms of this unending joy which began its movement. Or, as he says, it's a delirium of the self-embodying spirit. And he continues, this is the whole basis of the pessimist theory of the world. Optimist it may be as to worlds and states beyond, because nobody disputes that. There are avenues of exit. One can get out of this world and enter into a state of moksha, of liberation, nirvana, extinction of apparent being. But pessimist as to the earthly life and the destiny of the mental being in his dealings with the material universe. For it affirms that since the very nature of material existence is division, and the very seat of embodied mind is self-limitation, ignorance, and egoism, to seek satisfaction of the spirit upon earth, or to seek an issue and divine purpose and culmination for the world play, is a vanity and delusion. Only in a heaven of the spirit, and not in the world, or only in the spirit's true quietude, and not in its phenomenal activities, can we reunite existence and consciousness with the divine self-delight. So, in other words, this pessimist view would say that, yes, we can regain that, but to do it we must leave the world. We cannot be part of this world, part of the material existence, and attain that. The issue, again, as he writes here, is not an issue of, or a topic. It means a going out in the old sense, in the old French sense, I think. But this cannot be Sri Aurobindo's position, because for the integralist, it is not a salvation beyond, but a fulfillment here that we are seeking. In the here and now. In Sanskrit, ihaiva. My mother's favorite phrase, by the way, which she inculcated to myself and my brother, was here and now. My brother noted that he took it so to heart that he couldn't bear to read history. It was a figment of the past. Here and now is what matters. So, the infinite can only recover itself by rejecting as an error and a false step its attempt to find itself in the finite. This would be the pessimist view. Nor can the emergence of mental consciousness in the material universe bring with it any promise of a divine fulfillment. For the principle of division is not proper to matter, but to mind. If this principle of division originates, it is not with matter, it is with mind, so mind is not going to be the guy that solves this. Matter is only an illusion of mind, into which mind brings its own rule of division and ignorance. Now let us hasten to distinguish between Sri Aurobindo's use of the term illusion here and what Shankara might mean. Here, the illusion that mind has is that in creating this world and then exploring it, it gives maximum discreteness to form as it receives the diversity pouring out of the supramental consciousness and fixes it, stations it here in matter. So what it thinks it perceives as it is disconnected with the supramental is a world of disparate realities. It does not see the unity that is inherent in being. It can sense that something is there, but it does not directly experience it. Therefore, within this illusion, mind, just a second. Matter is only an illusion of mind, into which mind brings its own rule of division and ignorance. Therefore, within this illusion, mind can only find itself. It can only travel between the three terms of the divided existence it has created. It cannot find there the unity of the spirit or the truth of the spiritual existence. The three terms are, of course, matter, life, and mind, all founded upon this divided view of reality that mind as a cosmic agency has. Now, it is true that the principle of division in matter can be only a creation of the divided mind which has precipitated itself into material existence. For that material existence has no self-being, is not the original phenomenon, but only a form created by an all-dividing life force which works out the conceptions of an all-dividing mind. So there is a cosmic consequence of this divided mind in action. And this is a neat little description of how this comes into being. More about that in a moment, but the life force, obviously, drawing its inherent power from Chit Shakti, the conscious force of existence. Mind, drawing upon the variety possible to the supramental view of an infinite number of things existing in a harmony. So, mind representing supermind, life representing Chit Shakti. By working out being into these appearances of the ignorance, inertia, and division of matter, those three culminations again, the dividing mind has lost and imprisoned itself in a dungeon of its own building, is bound with chains which it has itself forged. So mind, in a sense, has built this limited view of an unfolding cosmos, and it has no solution to it. It is bound by its own chain. It has built its own prison and locked itself inside. And if it be true that the dividing mind is the first principle of creation, then it must be also the ultimate attainment possible in the creation, and the mental beings struggling vainly with life and matter, overpowering them only to be overpowered by them, repeating eternally a fruitless cycle, must be the last and highest word of cosmic existence. Remember, this is the pessimist view of things. This is not Sri Aurobindo's view of things, but he's giving it its farthest logical development here. So if mind is the primary creator, the pessimist view is correct. If mind is the first principle of creation, this is right, but it isn't. Supermind is the first principle of creation. Mind only acts out the original will, extant, empowering itself from the supermind. But no such consequence ensues if, on the contrary, it is the immortal and infinite spirit that has veiled itself in the dense robe of material substance and works there by the supreme creative power of supermind, permitting the divisions of mind and the reign of the lowest or material principle only as initial conditions for a certain evolutionary play of the one in the many. If, in other words, it is not merely a mental being who is hidden in the forms of the universe, but the infinite being, knowledge, will, which emerges out of matter, first as life, then as mind, with the rest of it still unrevealed, then the emergence of consciousness out of the apparently inconscient must have another and completer term: the appearance of a supramental spiritual being who shall impose on his mental, vital, bodily workings a higher law than that of the dividing mind is no longer impossible. On the contrary, it is the natural and inevitable conclusion of the nature of cosmic existence. So if there is Satchit Ananda. Existence, consciousness, bliss. Positively figuring what is ultimately unknowable. And if that Satchit Ananda manifests, creates through this totalizing, harmonizing consciousness of supermind, and mind accords itself, arising from the supermind, then a supramental being will inevitably emerge and impose its law on its vehicle and upon the world. Because Satchit Ananda must manifest itself. It is the nature of its own experience, always to be so. However it hides itself, it always reemerges, because there is no other. There is only that one. And its experience of itself, despite the eonic convolutions of becoming, must always eventuate in its experience of what it really is. Delight. What seems to be dark must become full of light again. What seems to be insentient must become joyful. What seems to be ignorant must become unitary in being, with its own power of consciousness, with its own self-experience. Such a supramental being would, as we have seen, liberate the mind from the knot of its divided existence and use the individualization of mind as merely a useful subordinate action of the all-embracing supermind. And he would liberate the life also from the knot of its divided existence and use the individualization of life as merely a useful subordinate action of the one conscious force fulfilling its being and joy in a diversified unity. Is there any reason why he should not also liberate the bodily existence from the present law of death, division, and mutual devouring, and use individualization of body as merely a useful subordinate term of the one divine conscious existence made serviceable for the joy of the infinite in the finite? So, liberated mind, liberated life, liberated body, mind representing supermind, life representing the chit shakti, body representing the principle of existence or sat. Or why this spirit should not be free in a sovereign occupation of form, consciously immortal, even in the changing of his robe of matter, possessed of his self-delight in a world subjected to the law of unity and love and beauty. So he notes here that we might still swap robes. This physical being may be set aside, but not in oblivion, consciously, and without the denial of death imposing its law upon us. Not the principle of division and disintegration, but us saying, I think I'll change clothes. And an experience of the world in which every thread is part of a tapestry of this beauty which expresses itself in unity, in love. And if man, he says, be the inhabitant of terrestrial existence, through whom that transformation of the mental into the supramental can at last be operated, is it not possible that he may develop, as well as a divine mind and a divine life, also a divine body? Or if the phrase seemed to be too startling to our present limited conceptions of human potentiality, may he not, in his development of his true being and its light and joy and power, arrive at a divine use of mind and life and body, by which the descent of spirit into form shall be at once humanly and divinely justified? Huh? Wonderful. Adbhuta. And this is his own view. completely striking off the table the previous pessimistic view which he presented. The one thing that can stand in the way of that ultimate terrestrial possibility is if our present view of matter and its laws represent the only possible relation between sense and substance, between the divine as knower and the divine as object, or if, other relations being possible, they are yet not in any way possible here, but must be sought on higher planes of existence. Must we leave? Must we take that issue and arrive at that far away from this cosmos to gain that fulfillment? In that case, it is in heavens beyond that we must seek our entire divine fulfillment, as the religions assert, and their other assertion of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of the perfect upon earth must be put aside as a delusion. That too exists within religious visions. Here we can only pursue or attain an internal preparation or victory, and having liberated the mind and life and soul within, must turn from the unconquered and unconquerable material principle, from an unregenerated and intractable earth, to find elsewhere our divine substance. We have to quit, if that view is true. There is, however, no reason why we should accept this limiting conclusion. There are, quite certainly, other states, even of matter itself. There is undoubtedly an ascending series of the divine gradations of substance. There is the possibility of the material being transfiguring itself through the acceptation of a higher law than its own, which is yet its own, because it is always there latent and potential in its own secrecies. So again, he rejects that. Just as Satchit Ananda is the omnipresent reality, inescapably present in all things, however divided, however discontented we may be within our experience of things, Satchit Ananda is there. And if Satchit Ananda is there, then the supermind, which expresses that infinity, must be present too. So already the engine of our fulfillment is present within us, and we need but start it up. Find the key of ignition and press go. So, spirit and matter are one. Matter is spirit made concrete. It seems opposite because of how it came into being through the perplexed and dividing mind, which cannot envision ultimate unity as can its supramental parent. And this culminates in an embeddedness in ignorance. But the evolutionary urge to rise out of that ignorance manifests heart and mind to oppose the material brutality of the apparent cosmos. And we aspire to unity through association and assimilation first, and then into greater and greater terms of that. We become aware as we grow of our limits. We feel pain in the body. We are dissatisfied in our life parts with an imperfect experience. We are dismayed by our obvious ignorance. So matter, life, and mind, as they are presented to us at the outset of the cosmic emergence, offer an insufficient view to our questing spirit. Division seems to deny the presence of Ananda, but we know it is there. Division seems to justify pessimism. We will not accept division. We will, as immortal spirits, move forward until we have unveiled that spiritual reality in matter itself. And our next step is in the 26th chapter, the ascending series of substance, where he has already suggested to us, we find how all of these grades of existence are interconnected, and that what we see as matter is only its front face. There is another reality to matter, which we can explore consciously. So, to that, next week, before we conclude this week though, I thought I would try your patience again with a passage from Savitri. It is my reading of Savitri which would try your patience, not the exquisite poetry that Sri Aurobindo has left the world. This is from Book 2, the book of the Traveler of the Worlds, Canto 5, the Godheads of the Little Life. At the outset of this enigmatic world, which seems at once an enormous brute machine and a slow unmasking of the spirit in things, in this revolving chamber without walls, in which God sits impassive everywhere, as if unknown to himself and by us unseen, in a miracle of inconscient secrecy, yet is all here, his action and his will. In this whirl and sprawl through infinite vacancy, the spirit became matter and lay in the whirl, a body sleeping without sense or soul. A mass phenomenon of visible shapes, supported by the silence of the void, appeared in the eternal consciousness and seemed an outward and insensible world. There was none there to see and none to feel. Only the miraculous inconscient, a subtle wizard skilled, was at its task, inventing ways for magical results, managing creation's marvelous device, marking mechanically dumb wisdom's points, using the unthought, inevitable idea. It did the works of God's intelligence, or wrought the will of some supreme unknown. Still, consciousness was hidden in nature's womb. Unfelt was the bliss whose rapture dreamed the worlds. Being was an inert substance driven by force. At first was only an etheric space. Its huge vibrations circled round and round, housing some unconceived initiative. Upheld by a supreme original breath, expansion and contraction's mystic act created touch and friction in the void. Into abstract emptiness brought clash and clasp. Parent of an expanding universe in a matrix of disintegrating force, by spending it conserved an endless sum. On the hearth of space it kindled a viewless fire that, scattering worlds as one might scatter seeds, whirled out the luminous order of the stars. An ocean of electric energy formlessly formed its strange wave particles, constructing by their dance this solid scheme, its mightiness in the atom shut to rest. Masses were forged or feigned, and divisible shapes. Light flung the photons, swift revealing spark, and showed in the minuteness of its flash imaged this cosmos of apparent things. Thus has been made this real, impossible world, an obvious miracle of convincing show. Or so it seems to man's audacious mind, who seats his thought as the arbiter of truth, his personal vision as impersonal fact, as witnesses of an objective world, his erring sense and his instrument's artifice. Thus must he work life's tangible riddle out in a doubtful light, by error seize on truth, and slowly part the visage and the veil. Namaste. Jai Ma.